Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of D.E.I. Deathwatch, the digest show that takes a look at the downfall and the doubling down of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And boy, oh boy, did something crazy happen in the last 24 hours that pertains particularly to previous, I was trying to keep up with the alliteration, I can't, previous videos I've done on this channel regarding a particular individual in the DEI landscape, but I'll get to that momentarily. First, who's joining me on this beautiful Friday afternoon? Mike Savage, Blarg, the Alexander, good afternoon. Adam Nixon, hello. Shady Grin, hello. Somnamnul Nation, hello. Juliet, good afternoon. Keeverdam, good afternoon, and thank you, Keeverdam, as always, for providing the link to the Give, Send, Go to Chad's family, guys, top of the chat box. Friend of the channel, Lamented Guide, asked that his friend Chad and his family be profiled as they are being moved out of their home and they are in need of help to avoid being homeless. So if you guys can take a look at that fundraiser when you have the opportunity. If you can donate, please do so. But even if you can't, if you can share that out on social media, that would be appreciated. So thank you ahead of time for that. And thank you, Keeverdam, as always, for providing the link. Sapien 187, good afternoon. Unit 731, good afternoon. Are you guys cousins or something? Sabian number, unit number. Mike R., good afternoon. Adega Outlaw, pardon me. Good afternoon. Angelverse, hello. Unfairophilia, hello. Miranda Stone is here. Well, you guys know about Miranda Stone, don't you? Well, let me tell you. Advocatus Diaboli, good afternoon. Anybody else? Dr. Functional, good afternoon. And I think that's everybody. Did I get everybody? Did I say hello to Morgan King? Morgan King, good afternoon to you too. And anybody else I missed? Anybody lurking? Anybody in the future? All right, well, not to belabor the big news, but NBA DEI Chief Leslie Slayton Brown, they leave that part of her name off for some reason, stepping down. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Leslie Slayton Brown, well, let me tell you, just by accident, really, I've done 2 videos on Leslie Slayton Brown. If you go to my channel and you click on the magnifying glass and you just look up HP, you will find a video on there regarding Leslie Slayton Brown back when she was the Chief Diversity Officer at HP Inc. And that video, at the time that I made it, it had some very telling and interesting statements from an executive of a major company. I've done a couple of videos now on HP, but in particular, that lady. And she made such an impression on me, even though that video was made years and years and years ago, just a few months ago, maybe about a year now. I can't remember. Time flies. I did a stream regarding the NBA and their DEI initiatives. And I hadn't watched the video about this ahead of time, so as we started watching the video, and you'll see this on the stream itself, as the lady they were interviewing started to talk, little sparks went off in my memory, and I went, wait a second. I recognize that cadence. I recognize that voice. I recognize that enthusiasm about the subject. That's the lady from HP. It was such a weird, small world kind of experience. I was like, wait, I know that person. And so, yeah, formerly of HP, now formerly of the NBA. What happened? What happened to Leslie Slayton Brown? Let's find out. Leslie Slayton, unless she got divorced. Maybe she got divorced and that's why they dropped the Brown. I don't know. Leslie Slayton, the NBA's chief DEI officer, informed colleagues in an email Wednesday she's stepping down, according to Adweek. Or maybe she got a job elsewhere. Ooh. Brown. Oh, so you added her name there. Okay, so you call her Leslie Slayton up here, and then you refer to her as Brown down here. Okay. Brown joined the NBA as Chief DEI Officer in 2023. Before that, she was Chief DEI Officer at HP since 2015. I think that's near on to the time that I found her. Adweek reported the league will hire a replacement. Oh, I can't wait to find out who they hire. Quote, the values of diversity and inclusion are central to the culture of the NBA, WNBA, and our other leagues and will remain core to our business and our workplace, the email said. Why are you leaving, Leslie? Tell me why. Tell me why. Other American sports organizations have taken steps to distance themselves from DEI. Major League Baseball, as I've reported previously, has removed diversity references from its career page entirely. Sure. The General Services Administration announced changes in February to the federal acquisition regulations meant to align with the president's executive order aimed at restoring Merito. I love Merito. I like mixing Meritos with Coca-Cola and see what happens. Merito? You mean meritocracy? Who wrote this again? Okay, and ending discrimination in the public and private sectors. The move reverses previous Biden administration executive orders that made it mandatory to consider DEI when reviewing contract proposals. So, wait, Biden issued executive orders that, by their very structure, violated civil rights law? I don't remember a whole bunch of hubbub by the media when that happened. Under Trump, language associated with DEI principles, such as they are, was also ordered removed from any federal acquisition, contracting, grant, or financial assistance procedures. What, we don't get to find out why? Is she moving on to greener pastures somewhere? I was hoping for more information from this article. Well, Fox News, you have disappointed me once again. But so a recurring character, such as it is, in my videos, she's stepping down. I wonder who will replace her. I wonder where she will show up next. I'm going to have to check up again in the future on Leslie Slayton Brown to see maybe she lands at a different company. Because that was a relatively short tenure at the NBA as compared to HP. So, there you go. I was hoping for something more in-depth. But that's what I get from Fox News. Robert Pincus, good afternoon. This is Kyle, hello. Josh Hammond, hello. The lovely Sherry, hello. Corey Suzuki, hello. And Woodcutta, hello. So that was the latest on the NBA, which I've done a couple of streams on now. I did a stream with the CEO of the, was the Tampa, was the Mavericks or the Buccaneers or something? I don't know. I don't know sports. Somebody here will tell me. Whatever, like the Tampa, Florida or whatever basketball team was. What was it? I don't know. The Cavaliers. That's what it was. The Cavaliers. Wherever the Cavaliers are. Maybe that's not even Florida. Anyway, the Cavaliers. Their CEO. I did a stream not too long ago where their CEO just barely mentioned DEI. Even though the entire episode or interview was titled about dealing with DEI and diversity, there was like one question embedded in an entire interview about it. That was disappointing. That was more disappointing than this article. But either way, let's move on to some more stuff. Some following up on the FCC investigating Disney. And Forbes, which is very, very pro-DEI, asked the question, the FCC is investigating Disney's DEI. Is this a danger to creative brands? Well, I guess it could be, but I guess the question is, since when has Disney been a creative brand of late? It's just been slop and reboots and failed attempts at new franchises. But let's find out what Forbes' argument is here. What constitutes DEI in a creative space? An utter lack of merit and just putting people into positions of authority and quote-unquote talent based on their demographic or their ideological adherence. I think of She-Hulk for some reason. The entire writer's room of She-Hulk was just filled with people who had absolutely no idea what they were doing. Didn't know how to write a legal procedural, didn't know how to write comedy, didn't know how to make use of an intellectual property they'd been handed. Speaking of Disney, but let's find out. Chances are we'll soon find out, and the implications could ripple across the creator landscape. Okay. In a letter addressed last week to Disney CEO Robert Iger, the Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr wrote that the FCC's Enforcement Bureau was to open an investigation into Disney and ABC over their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, saying the FCC was, quote, concerned that their DEI practices may violate FCC prohibitions on invidious forms of discrimination, unquote. While the investigation is framed as a compliance issue, it underscores the broader implications of President Trump's executive orders targeting DEI initiatives and the potential consequences for the creative industry. Do tell. Mainly, what exactly is DEI when dealing with companies who create content? Well, it's the same as with any company that creates anything else. Okay, well, let me explain it to you then, Forbes. Okay, diversity, equity, and inclusion assumes that the entire system of business, let's say, is constantly under pressure of oppression and suppression of certain demographics, and that disparities in population numbers in particular industries is evidence of this. And the only way to address this is to manufacture an outcome in demographic split using illegal discrimination. That's it. That is the core of DEI. It doesn't matter what the company is or what their output is. That's it. And so if let's say the animator's office at Disney is made up of too many white men, well, we have to change that. So we're going to set aside merit as a first prerequisite for hiring somebody in an animator's position, and we're first going to look at what is their demographic. Are they female? Are they non-white? Are they not straight? Those are all pluses. Never mind merit. That's at best a secondary or even tertiary consideration after what they look like. I don't know I can make it much more simple than that for you, Forbes, but let's see what you have to say. And what does this mean for the future of diverse programming? I don't know, Forbes. Tell me. Let's see. The Walt Disney Company is iconic, with a century-long legacy of creative and innovative storytelling. It owns a vast portfolio of assets, from theme parks, resorts, and studios to media and streaming services such as ESPN, ABC, Hulu, Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm. You want to mention Disney Plus? Okay. And Disney is at the center of another political and cultural battle of their own making. They're only in a battle because they decided to choose the fight. They chose the culture war they wanted to enter. The FCC will investigate Disney's mandatory inclusion standards at ABC, which required 50% of regular and recurring characters to be drawn from underrepresented groups. Which would also implicate hiring standards and back office hiring standards. Quote, these standards may have forced racial and identity quotas into every level of production, demanding that 50% or more of writers, directors, crew, and vendors be selected based on group identity, unquote, Carr said in his letter to Iger. Well, that's pretty close. Because as we've seen in Hollywood standards over the last several years, they have had quota systems set up, even for films, to be considered for Best Picture. You had to fulfill certain quotas in your production staff, in your writer's room, and so on and so forth, based on racial and gender demographics. Now, you can get away with hiring talent, like actors and stuff, on the basis of their race or gender, depending on the theme, the setting, the era, and so on of a production. If you're going to do a biographical picture of Martin Luther King Jr., you're not going to be dinged for violating the law for hiring someone who's black to play Martin Luther King Jr. That's just the nature of the beast. But if you have an internal quota behind the scenes for your production crew, your writers' staff, your producers, and so on, that then you set a quota, that's where you cross the line. Because now it's not fulfilling something that's pertinent to the story or the production or the setting. Now you're dealing with stuff that's behind the camera. And that gets into employment law, which is Title VII. Or Title VI if you accept any kind of federal funding or subsidy. Carr also pointed at Disney's use of racially segregated affinity groups and spaces for its staff. Ooh, do you mean ERGs? Despite Disney scaling back some DEI initiatives earlier this year in response to the administration's executive order, Carr said that, quote, significant concerns remain, unquote. Just to check over in the chat has stopped moving. Now, maybe everybody's just completely mesmerized by my narration here, which I would appreciate. At the same time, when the chat stops moving, it also is potentially a red flag to me that there's something wrong with the stream. So, If you can just let me know that you're alive out there, I'd appreciate it. Okay, all right, now I see people. Okay, just making sure. Because I have very few warning signs if something's wrong with the broadcast, and the chat not moving is one of them. So thank you so much. You're just quiet. Okay, that's fine. Disney has responded cautiously, stating that it is reviewing the FCC's letter and looks forward to engaging with the commission. Disney is not alone. The FCC's investigation into Disney is not the only one. It follows a similar probe into Comcast earlier this year and reflects the administration's broader campaign to eliminate DEI initiatives in federal agencies and discourage their use in private companies. To Disney's credit, if you say so, it has long invested in building equitable spaces. That's not to its credit. Scoring a top score of 100 on the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. That is not to its credit. The Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index is a giant convoluted quota system that at best, and I'm being diplomatic here, at best tempts fate with federal civil rights laws, and in many cases encourages companies to outright violate them with quotas. Forbes is completely in the tank with DEI. It's actually kind of amazing. And Disney shareholders widely rejected a recent anti-DEI proposal in their latest meeting, which could be to their own peril if the government actually follows through with serious consequences for violations of civil rights law, but that remains to be seen. In response to the current political climate, Disney issued a memo in February stating it would align its initiatives more closely with business goals and company values. So it hadn't been prior to this? Other organizations, including Paramount, Goldman Sachs, and Major League Baseball, have taken similar steps, removing references to diversity from their public-facing materials while concurrently maintaining internal commitments to inclusivity. So basically, lying. It's called lying. Unintended consequences for creative companies. Okay, I'm still waiting to hear what specifically creative companies have to fear from this. This investigation into Disney highlights the consequences of the anti-DEI stance, particularly for creative companies. Storytelling, by its very nature, thrives on diversity. Well, sure, but it also doesn't necessarily thrive on outright discrimination. I would just bring up one example. Strong Black Lead. This is an initiative that isn't talked about as much anymore, but as far as I know is still active over at Netflix. They did some marketing on this a few years ago where they were prioritizing shows and writers and actors and stories and so on that focused on Black people, specifically, exclusively setting aside entire production budgets just to focus on creators and producers and stories dealing with one racial demographic. Now, does that mean that Netflix had effectively, by setting aside a budget and creating a program, discriminated in who they were hiring on the basis of their race? It would sound like it. I don't know if anybody's looked into that any deeper, but, you know, it's kind of tells you something. When a company says outright, we're going to focus our efforts on this demographic and stories from this demographic exclusively, sure, storytelling can be diverse. Your hiring has to be based on merit. I'm wondering if they're going to parse that particular difference here. Now, storytelling by its very nature thrives on diversity. It is through diverse characters, perspectives, and narratives that companies like Disney have built their global appeal and cultural relevance. Mandatory inclusion standards, which also mean mandatory exclusion standards, such as those implemented at ABC, are not just about meeting quotas. Forbes, maybe they're not just about meeting quotas, but if they're at all about meeting quotas, they are tempting fate with civil rights law. Again, I'm being diplomatic here because who knows what the particulars are, and I'm not a lawyer. But if you have quotas based on race, based on gender, then you're violating the law. Just saying. They are about reflecting the world as it is and creating content that resonates with a broad audience. Yeah, it's so broad that project after project after project based around these principles just seems to be failing. By targeting these policies, there is a risk the FCC could stifle creativity and limit the stories that can be told. No, it's not. It's not. It may actually encourage people to hire people on the basis of their talent and make better stories than the constant parade of slop that keeps coming out of Disney in particular and Hollywood in general over the last decade or more. Since Trump's executive orders were announced, no clear definition of the term DEI has been established. Nobody knows, guys. Nobody has any idea what DEI means. After all these years, it's like, nobody knows. Even we don't know. Even we at Forbes can't tell you what DEI really means. And what the term encompasses is at the discretion of the office or the identified lead at the company or government agency. Well, the first thing to do is say, have we invested anything explicitly in a DEI executive, DEI programs, DEI training? Well, I guess that's all out. We should probably get rid of that. If we just change the proverbial deck chairs on the Titanic by switching out DEI with inclusivity or global impact or something, then you're not really getting rid of it, are you? But we'll see what Major League Baseball and the other companies do. That raises an interesting question. Will Black and Hispanic or Latino content be classified under DEI and thus need to be removed to align with the, quote, mandates, policies, programs, preferences, and activities in the federal government, quote, unquote? No. No, Forbes. Black does not equal DEI. Hispanic does not equal DEI. Latino, as a qualification elsewise, does not equal DEI. Who are you hiring and why? Do you have a stated explicit initiative to give preference to people in hiring, writing positions, creative positions on the basis of their race, their gender, their ethnicity? If the answer is yes, that's what needs to go. That's what needs to go. I mean, here's the thing. I'm not so stupid as to think that sort of like California after they outlawed affirmative action in 1996, that companies and organizations aren't still going to try to find ways around to, in unspoken ways, fulfill their ideological quotas, even if they can't actually fulfill them on paper. That's always going to be the case. You know, if Netflix, as an example, decides to prioritize Hispanic writers and Hispanic stories just as sort of an amorphous statement of intent, but when they come down to hiring people for particular positions, they're not discriminating on the basis of their race or ethnicity or something, then that's fine. And even if they do, but they don't explicitly say so, what are you going to do? My main concern is, are companies following along with the law? Are they treating people as fairly as possible? And if somebody is constantly favoring certain people on the basis of their race or gender, that is at the very best discouraged, or I say at the worst discouraged, at the very best actually prosecuted if you can prove it. Because it always comes down to, do you have evidence of it? Pattern does not necessarily equal crime. But if you say, we have a DEI initiative and we have a quota for 50% of women in our XYZ by 2025, there's no mystery there. So if Disney and ABC had inclusivity standards, aka quotas, well, this doesn't affect any creative teams other than it forces people to have to actually value creativity and not the aesthetics. Moreover, what message does this send to other creative companies? I don't know, stop breaking civil rights laws? If Disney, a powerhouse in the entertainment industry, can be scrutinized for its DEI practices, smaller shops may feel pressured to abandon their own diversity initiatives to avoid a similar scrutiny. That is the point, Forbes. That's why I'm actually really glad that as their first bite at the Hollywood apple, so to speak, the Trump administration's gone after such a big player. because it sets a precedent. It makes an example of Disney. Now, the real question is, what kind of follow-through will there be? Like, if Disney and ABC actually did violate FCC standards or civil rights laws, there has to be, in my opinion, a serious consequence for that. Significant enough to, again, set a precedent and to make an example and to send a message throughout the rest of the industry. If you keep going down this road of actively discriminating and actively violating people's civil rights in your hiring and promotion practices, there will be consequences. Consequences that should have been befalling these companies for the last decade, but the law was ignored and soft-pedaled. And I've been talking about it for 9 years now. So good. Yes, that was the whole point, Forbes. Disney was picked to make an example. Also probably because I think Elon Musk doesn't like Disney. That might have had an influence on the selection of target. This could lead to a homogenization of content where underrepresented voices are sidelined in favor of so-called safer narratives that align with the administration's vision, which is just code for white people and white supremacy, because that's obviously what the outcome of this is going to be. Because obviously, prior to DEI, there were never any stories, any movies, any TV shows that featured anyone other than straight white people. That was it, guys. No movies, no TV shows, no books, no video games, nothing. It was all straight white people, left, right, and nothing. Never, ever. You know, when you remember Stand and Deliver? You ever see that movie, Stand and Deliver? You ever see Blade? How awesome Blade was, you know? Oh my gosh. Passenger 57. Man, suddenly I'm on a Wesley Snipes kick here. Passenger 57. What does Wesley Snipes say in that movie? That lets us all know what the reality of the situation is. Always bet on black. That's right. Those were the days. The ethical and economic implications. DEI initiatives are not just about representation. Well, not just, but that is the main mechanism. They are about creating equitable opportunities for all employees, regardless of race, gender, or background. No. They're about creating equitable outcomes for employees, regardless of merit. You're getting it backwards, Forbes. You're getting it backwards. But of course, you have to. Otherwise, you might have to admit that you're promoting something terrible. Framing these policies as discriminatory could undermine decades of progress in workplace equity. You know what, Forbes? You're right. It could undermine decades of progress in workplace equity, which would be a good thing. From an economic perspective, diversity is a proven driver of innovation and profitability. Really? Well, tell me. Where's your success story? I keep being told this. Does Forbes have a success story? Can they point to a company whose profits have increased significantly because of DEI? With America's demographics evolving, including these new, exciting voices, allows companies to overcome what has become a historic $6 trillion blind spot with these consumers. A $6 trillion? Really? So non-white people have not been spending $6 trillion? What? It is estimated that estimated by who? Estimated that black American spending power sits between $1.4 trillion and $1.8 trillion annually. Wow, okay. A powerful economic bloc that's comparable to the gross domestic products of Mexico, Canada, and Italy. Latinos' purchasing power in the U.S. reached $3.4 trillion in 2021 and grew more than 2 times faster than non-Latino groups. Asian Americans, with $1.3 trillion in buying power, have a median household income of $104,646, as well as the above-average income in the U.S. This demographic has grown 314% over the past 2 decades, the fastest growing of all ethnicity groups. Wow. And they're just not spending money? Tapping into these consumer markets is not only smart, but necessary for robust corporate bottom lines. Okay, and so the way to do this is to potentially illegally discriminate on the basis of race, gender, orientation, and hiring practices in major corporations and production companies across the country. Studies consistently show that companies with diverse teams outperform their less diverse counterparts. This, I don't have the hyperlink here. I really hope, I'd really be curious to know, does this link to the McKinsey study? Because every time I hear studies consistently show this, they always point back to that one 2015 McKinsey study. For creative companies, this is particularly true. Really? Well, how has that worked out for Disney? How did Strange New Worlds work out? What have they done recently with their upcoming animated show about the baseball team or whatever? How has Snow White worked out for that? A diverse workforce brings a wealth of perspectives and experiences that can lead to more compelling and relatable content. If you're talking about diversity of thought, then you may have a point. But you're not talking about diversity of thought. In fact, in this entire article, all you've brought up is racial and ethnic demographics. And that's it. You're not talking about creativity, which can apply to anybody, regardless of their appearance. You're talking about aesthetics. Every single time. But for some reason, you don't want to acknowledge that. Targeting DEI initiatives could have a ripple effect on the industry. I hope so. Discouraging companies from investing in diversity and ultimately impacting their bottom line. Yeah, you know how it might impact their bottom line? By making it go up. Yeah, if you get rid of hiring people on the basis of aesthetic fit and focus on people with actual talent, yeah, that might increase their bottom line. The question is not just whether DEI policies will survive, but whether the creative industry can continue to thrive without them. Well, let's test that theory. Let's see what happens if you actually hired creatives based on their ability. Forbes. And perhaps the most crucial issue of all is who gets to decide what stories are told, as well as who gets to tell them. Well, I think the market has something to do with that. What's popular, what people are willing to pay for, and who gets to tell them? I don't know, people with a proven track record of creativity? Like, just for example, I might mention A Working Man, a movie that's out right now, based on books originally written by Chuck Dixon. Books that I'm reading right now, and the books are awesome. If you like vigilante justice stories, oh man, Levon Cade is a great series of books to read. It's great. It's actual creativity. And you have a movie based around a real creative. But he just doesn't fit the diversity model, does he? So I guess that thing just wouldn't succeed. Except it trounced Snow White at the box office on its second weekend. I mean, just saying. Anyway, Read by Nature. It's not even equitable outcomes. If it discriminates overwhelmingly against white men, then it's still seen as ideal. They have no intention in reflecting the outside world there. No, and even if they did, even if they said, oh, we're going to have our workforce reflect the population demographics of the United States, that's still a quota. That's still setting statistical standards for who you can and cannot hire, who you'll reject for hiring or include in hiring. All that rhetoric is utter and absolute nonsense. Oh no, guys, we're not breaking the law. We're not violating anybody's rights. We're just making sure that our workforce reflects the communities that we serve. Based on what metric? And when you say reflect, I know it's a word that can mean a lot of things depending on context, but given this context, I can only imagine it means, again, aesthetics. And if you're judging people on the basis of their aesthetics for employment, you are no different than a company or a business back in the 60s putting a sign out that said whites only. So I don't understand how this just does not penetrate the skulls of these people when they say things like this. These DEI nut jobs. They put out this rhetoric that they think they're being, oh, I'm so progressive and I'm so much better than people. I have a high virtue and so on and so forth. All you're doing is advocating for the same thinking that led to the Civil Rights Act in the first place. Making spaces exclusionary on the basis of someone's race or gender? Hiring people because of what they look like, first and foremost, and rejecting other people because of what they look like? I've been asking these questions for the better part of a decade now, and just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But, you know, the DEI advocates, they still think that they're doing the right thing. We analyzed racial justice statements from the 500 largest U.S. companies and found that DEI officials really did have an influence. You know what? I believe you. What was the quality of this influence, is the question. In 2020, American businesses responded to an unprecedented wave of racial justice protests. You mean violent riots predicated ostensibly on something bad that happened, but mostly just for people to have an opportunity to loot and burn things down. Sorry, that was my inside voice talking. With an equally unprecedented surge in corporate commitments. Yeah, a lot of corporations really put up their virtue signaling in billions of promised dollars for DEI initiatives. And man, oh man, those consultants were just salivating at the idea of getting a slice of that pie. And then when it was retracted, they were not happy. Done a couple of streams on that too. Even as President Donald Trump was calling protesters terrorists, companies and industries across the U.S. pledged donations, launched diversity initiatives, and issued statements in support of equity and inclusion. Yeah, anything to get Trump, guys. We gotta own Trump. As social scientists who study corporate political behavior, we, like many others, wondered whether this wave of corporate statements signaled a true commitment to racial justice. Think about that for a second. Justice predicated on race. Just think about that one for a second. Racial justice, or whether it was just symbolic. It was pandering to the masses. It was going along to get along. It was fulfilling the wishes of people like the World Economic Forum and their government sustainability requirements and everybody's DEI requirements and their diversity requirements. They were jumping on the bandwagon. It was virtue signaling beyond compare. That's all it was. Some skeptics suggested that corporate statements about racial justice were just window dressing. They were. Still others worried that corporations were becoming woke and distracted from making profits. Well, they did that too. These concerns have taken on new meaning as the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, has become a cornerstone of the new administration. When Donald Trump returned to office, two of his first acts were to ban DEI in federal government employment and overturning 60 years of affirmative action mandates on firms that do business with the government. Yeah, well, what happened with affirmative action with the Supreme Court? You want to address that? Affirmative action was outlawed by the Supreme Court for colleges and universities, and consequently it effectively becomes outlawed for everything else. Oh, but anyway, this made us wonder, were the DEI efforts of recent years actually associated with greater corporate commitments to racial justice, or was it just more political theater? Well, I guess it depends on how you measure racial justice. Right? I mean, you have to have some kind of metric of success. To try and better understand what was happening in corporate America, we collected every racial justice statement made by a Fortune 500 firm in response to the 2020 murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter's protest. We found that most firms stayed silent, probably the wisest option, while others made only weak symbolic responses. Well, here's a question. Why would any company be required to respond at all? Why was it necessary? And how many times have I asked this? What does the death of one man in police custody have to do with hiring standards at Fortune 500 companies? Where's the line between these things? You have a drug addict that dies of a heart attack in police custody, and somehow that implicates corporate America in wrongdoing. Explain that one to me. I still haven't had anybody explain that to me who promotes this stuff. Okay, just 1 in 5 made strong commitments, pledging resources and structural changes to their business practices, such as revamping hiring policies or funding racial justice organizations. For that 20%, however, commitments could be substantial. Take Microsoft, for example. Just 10 days after Floyd's murder, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella sent an internal memo condemning police brutality and urging employees to take action. To take action on police brutality? Oh, how'd you do that? He also announced that Microsoft would donate $1.5 million to racial justice organizations. Oh, you mean like Black Lives Matter? Where the people in charge of that embezzled all the money to buy themselves mansions? Yeah, good use of money. Microsoft then pledged to invest $150 million in diversity and inclusion efforts and to establish a $50 million fund to support Black-owned business partners. Oh, so setting aside money specifically for people on the basis of their race and excluding anybody else from such opportunities on the basis of their race. Good job, Microsoft. Microsoft also committed to doubling its Black-owned suppliers by 2023 and Black senior executives by 2025. Committed to doubling, you mean having a 50% quota? Wow, on the basis of race? Wow. The impact of the DEI professional network. DEI professionals help companies manage the diversity of their workforces by promoting fairness in treatment and social inclusion. Fairness, you say? Oh, okay. Well, what about any, I don't know, Hispanic potential senior executives at Microsoft or Asian senior executives at Microsoft? They're not worthy of consideration, apparently. I mean, never mind those white people. Obviously, they're not, but okay. Fairness. Their basic job is to ensure that workplaces are respectful to all employees. Oh, is that their basic job? Wait, a DEI executive's job is to ensure workplaces are respectful to all employees. Really? The rise of this job title signals a managerial shift from tolerating cultural diversity to promoting broad inclusion. Oh man, it just sounds so utopian. Some DEI practices, for example, diversity training focused on discrimination, can lead to backlash, research has shown. Focusing on discrimination. You mean, are those the diversity training sessions where all white people are implicated in being racist from the get-go? And that you have to fight back against your natural inclinations as a white person to be racist? Those kind of trainings? We've seen those trainings before. But inclusive practices such as ensuring mentoring for everyone simply tend to foster better workplaces. Mentoring for everyone? Oh, so it's a professional development program that has no particular preferences or discriminations involved? Really? Everyone? Interesting. So really, you guys are just egalitarians. Is that right? This made us wonder what distinguished the minority of firms that made more robust commitments to racial justice from the others. Our hunch, so you went in with assumptions ahead of time? Okay. Our hunch was that when firm leadership discussed how to react to the Black Lives Matter protests, companies that already had DEI professionals with influential voices took stronger action. Stronger action to do what? What problem were they attempting to solve? Black Lives Matter is protesting. We need to do something about this. Let's dedicate a bunch of money to racially laden programs to satisfy a bunch of rioters burning down cities. Are you guys even listening to yourselves? To test our hypothesis, we first searched globally for all DEI job titles in all large firms in LinkedIn. Oh, well, there you go. LinkedIn profiles provide the most recent 10 jobs a person holds, so we can identify when and at what firm people had DEI jobs. Well, unless, of course, in the recent backlash to DEI, people went in and started changing their titles, but okay. LinkedIn has proven to be a reliable source of career data for corporate professionals and is especially appropriate for new and growing job title such as DEI. It's not a new title. It may not be growing any faster than it was before because of the backlash now. Who is this? The Conversation, whoever this is. Is Gene Hackman in here somewhere? DEI officer, Chief Diversity Officer, has been a title going back at least, probably longer, at least 8 years. I was doing some of my very first diversity videos had people with the title of Chief Diversity Officer. It's not new. It's been growing since then. I think it might be diminishing now as people roll back DEI. The general picture is clear. Large companies had been hiring more DEI professionals, of course, because they were going in on the trend. They were going in on the popularity of this ridiculousness and getting away with it because the EEOC and elsewise wasn't paying attention. So, wow, a lot of DEI people have been hired over the last 10 years. Amazing. There was a rapid rise in DEI positions in the U.S. with a big jump in 2020, followed by declines in 2022 when our data ends. Oh, so you didn't check and see what happens after the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action, and 2022 was when companies started rolling back their diversity budgets and everything else. Oh, okay, well, that's convenient. Among Fortune 500 companies, however, only about half had any DEI professionals. Well, that's obviously a sin. DEI roles were growing rapidly, but they were far from universal in the largest corporations. And that's a bad thing. Why? We also discovered that there was a set of firms central to the global DEI professional network. These firms were a source of future DEI staff for other companies. We measured centrality within the DEI network as the number of people in a firm's DEI workforce that once worked in other prominent firms in the DEI network. Network centrality is a common way social scientists measure influence in groups. Okay, you're not going to have to convince me you have to not have to work too hard to convince me that DEI as a concept and as a job title increased in number over the course of the last several years. Sure. And that companies were dumping a lot of money into it. That doesn't mean it was effective. That doesn't mean it was right. That doesn't mean it was good. And it also doesn't mean that it was required for companies to have such programs, except for the fact that all of the major finance organizations basically required anyone they were going to invest with to have a DEI program. This is what happened. DEI became a checkbox on a company's prospectus as a virtue signal to all the other companies who were trying to show off just how virtuous they were. So it wasn't so much that a lot of companies necessarily believed in DEI as they had no other choice but to say they had some kind of DEI program going on. Now, that is different from companies who bought in completely into it and started extolling the virtues of it like they were an evangelist on Sunday morning. So if you're trying to convince me that DEI became popular over time, great, but isn't that logical fallacy, argumentum ad populum? Just because something is popular, therefore it must be correct or good or effective? To be clear, these weren't companies that specialize in DEI. Yeah, those are consulting groups, but rather had hired DEI staff to help run their core business. The most central firms to the DEI professional network included some of the country's largest banks, consulting firms, and corporations such as IBM, Johnson & Johnson, and General Electric. These firms are also more likely to have made longer and larger investments in DEI staff than other firms. And what's been the ROI on that investment? What is the ROI on DEI? I know these companies made this big investment, but what did they get back from it? Based on prior studies of influence and social networks, we suspected that when a firm's DEI staff were recruited from these prominent firms in the DEI network, they would have more influence over corporate decisions on how to respond to the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. Okay, how did this improve the firm's outcomes and profits? We found that 20% of firms that made strong racial justice comments had much more prominent DEI staff than those that remained silent or made only symbolic statements. So, this finding is held up in multiple statistical models where we have controlled for other factors that might be of relevance to making strong racial justice commitments. And by racial justice commitments, you mean setting aside tons and tons of money for a specific niche organizations such as DEI consulting groups and the like. So, do you mean to tell me that someone whose only job is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion and focus explicitly on race and gender as the most important things in the world had a lot to say about race and or gender when race and or gender situations came up? And DEI staff, it appears, were influential when the national conversation turned to racial justice. Influential how? Tell me this, the conversation. How has racial divisions in this country improved since the advent of DEI and its popularity? Right? I mean, if DEI does what it's supposed to do, then we should be in a far more sustainable and peaceful time in our lives when it comes to racial stress or racial division or racial inequity. So how has DEI solved for this over the last decade or more? And don't pretend like DEI just arrived last week or something, this new and thriving job title. No, it's been around for more than a decade, as your own numbers show. So, do I even want to read the rest of this? I really don't. This cheerleading squad for DEI, it's like, did you know that somebody whose entire job is to focus around race said something about race? That's better than a company that didn't have somebody focusing on race not saying something about race. Because race. But that's DEI. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy of profit. As long as there is race to complain about, DEI will have a business. As long as you can point to a disparity and say, aha, that is an injustice, DEI will exist. Unless the laws start getting enforced. Let's see what else we got here. Angelverse. It doesn't really make sense if you put it like that. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Why is it that in the 90s there was great TV shows that showed all walks of life, i.e. Fresh Prince, Family Matters, Different World, just off the top of my head? I know. It's amazing. How did those shows ever become popular? How did they ever get created? How did they ever find an audience? Why did I see my fellow students in junior high who weren't black quoting Will Smith? I don't know how that happened. I don't know why those shows were popular. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, this was before DEI. So it's just amazing. Also, Othome, hello. All right, let's do a couple more stories and then we'll start wrapping things up. Let's do this one here. This is a big one. Could be. Again, one thing I always want to predicate all of these stories with is that it sounds good. The question is, will there be any actual follow-up or consequences? It's been a lot of lip service lately, and it's been stuff that I've been glad to hear, but something has to follow through or else it means nothing. Schools have 10 days, that's as of yesterday, so now 9 days, I guess, 10 days to comply with Trump anti-DEI policy or face losing federal funds. This is a big one. The Trump administration has ratcheted up pressure on K-12 schools in California and across the nation to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion practices by giving districts and states a deadline of 10 days to certify their compliance or risk losing all federal funding. Although federal funding for education is challenging to calculate and arrives through multiple channels, some tallies put the figure at $16.3 billion per year in California. That's only California, guys. Including money for school meals, students with disabilities, and early education Head Start programs. The Los Angeles Unified School District has estimated that it receives about $1.26 billion a year, well, in federal funding, it should say. Trump and his appointees have repeatedly threatened state and local officials with federal funding cuts if they don't abide by his executive orders and by his administration's legal interpretations. His administration's legal interpretations. You know, I really should, I keep meaning to, I really should just plug in a copy of Title VI and have that ready as an overlay for these streams. If we need to keep reminding ourselves what established civil rights law says regarding organizations and entities that accept federal funding. Because it's not Trump's legal interpretation. between Title VI and the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action, it's clear. It's done. It's been there since the 60s. The Thursday memo follows a February 14th letter in which the U.S. Department of Education told all K-12 school districts and higher education institutions to end the consideration of race in, quote, admissions, hiring, promotion, compensation, financial aid, scholarships, prizes, administrative support, discipline, housing, graduation ceremonies, and all other aspects of student academic and campus life, unquote. Or, as Title VI says, if you accept federal funding, you cannot discriminate on the basis of race and sex in any of your programs or activities. Terms broad enough to encompass all of those things. But moving on. The February letter laid out a new federal anti-discrimination enforcement policy threatening to pull federal dollars from schools that do not fall in line. Since then, many colleges and universities in California and throughout the country have eliminated diversity efforts, typically referred to as DEI, scrubbing references from their websites. Well, that is one step, but as we've seen from other articles, the question is, are they actually following through on activities and initiatives internally? Again, that is where really the rubber is going to meet the road on enforcement. We'll see. The Thursday memo takes the threats to funding one step further, demanding that education leaders sign a document saying they have eliminated DEI programming. Quote, federal financial assistance is a privilege, not a right, Craig Traynor, acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, said in a statement. He said many schools have flouted their legal obligations, quote, including by using DEI programs to discriminate against one group of Americans to favor another, unquote. Yes, and if you want to see evidence of this, I have a playlist on my channel, I know, self-plugging here, but there you go, called Curriculum of Fear, where I have example after example after example after example over the course of the last 9 years of different educational organizations and institutions practicing rampant discrimination in violation of not only civil rights law, but now, of course, the Trump executive order. And some of those videos are not that old. On Thursday morning, various state and local officials said they were assessing the memo. A spokesperson for the California Department of Education provided a preliminary reaction. Quote, while we are continuing to review this morning's letter, I'm sure it's very complicated, it appears to be yet another attempt to impose a national ideology on local schools by threatening to withhold vital resources for students, said Elizabeth Sanders, whoever that is. A national ideology, yeah, you know what the national ideology is called? It's called the U.S. Constitution. It's called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's the national ideology that local schools should have been paying attention to this entire time. But never mind that. No, this is something evil. Quote, regardless of this or any letter, we hold firm that basic needs of our nation's children must not become bargaining chips, unquote. Well, you bargain them away when you started discriminating on the basis of race or gender in your hiring practices and your programs. Okay? That's when you started bargaining away the resources that you so rely on and have come to take for granted. Something that I'm really curious to see, and I mentioned this before, one of my earliest sort of investigations into illegal discrimination in schools was the Boom experience in a school district in Washington State. They still have that same event scheduled for this later this year. And given that its registration form explicitly says it is a program for Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic students, I think male students still, I'm again curious to see if they're going to follow through with that. And especially after this little thing. Another comment came from Tanya Ortiz Franklin, an elected board member of the LA Unified School District. Quote, instead of wasting the time collecting signatures, the federal government should be focused on maintaining and executing the level of support our most vulnerable students require from the country that will soon depend on their educated leadership, Franklin said. Won't somebody please think of the children? And would you think about the children's welfare in instilling in them a notion that certain people are more valuable or certain people are more vilified on the basis of their race or their gender? You think that should be important too? Chino Valley Unified School District Board President Sonia Shah said she supported the thrust of the memo. Quote, the Trump administration directive is a critical step in reining in the excessive politicization of our schools, Shah said. Quote, we need to get back to the basics of education, teaching kids how to read, write, and think critically rather than pushing divisive ideologies. This is about protecting the future of our children by ensuring their education isn't hijacked by political agendas that don't belong in the classroom, unquote. Exactly. The certification directs state and school leaders to sign a, quote, reminder of legal obligations, unquote, acknowledging their federal money is conditioned on compliance with federal civil rights laws. Title VI. Just go back to Title VI. Why don't you mention Title VI by name? The certification compliance form included several pages of legal analysis in support of the administration's demands, which are based, in large part, on the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to ban affirmative action in college admissions through a lawsuit brought against Harvard University. Yes, but good gravy, what were the parts of that decision that are so important? Enforcing Title VI and the 14th Amendment. Right. The existing civil rights and federal laws. This isn't some kind of knee-jerk reaction to some whimsy the Supreme Court had. They were enforcing existing laws. You want to keep pretending that this is just some kind of notion that Trump came up with at the last second. Some kind of weird, radical reinterpretation of existing law. No. Traynor quoted Chief Justice John Roberts Jr., who said, quote, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it, unquote. Yes. Traynor added that, quote, no student should be denied opportunities or treated differently because of his or her race. We hope all state and local education agencies agree and certify their compliance with this legal and constitutional principle, unquote. Very good. It's as simple as that. Right? It's as simple as that. According to the administration's legal analysis, schools and states that use DEI practices can face a loss of federal money, including grants and contracts, and also can be held liable under the False Claims Act, meaning that an agency could be sanctioned with financial penalties beyond the loss of federal funding. Again, read Title VI. The legal analysis specifically mentions Title I fundings as being at risk, which sends billions of dollars a year to America's schools to help offset the effects of poverty in the education of students. California receives about $2.1 billion in Title I funds, LA Unified about $460 million. The department ordered state education offices to sign the certification and collect certifications from school systems. The move raises questions including, what happens if a school district agrees to comply, but the state of California does not? Quote, it's very likely that the Trump administration will set up funding directly to compliant districts, said Lance Christensen, president of California Policy Partners, which describes itself as a free market business association. Well, that answers that question. Christensen is supportive of groups that have filed complaints alleging that California education agencies are violating anti-discrimination laws. It's probably not a difficult argument to make. I've looked at several panel discussions now about California doing everything it can to still try to fulfill affirmative action quotas without technically violating the law, except that they probably have. Quote, the real question is how badly California is out of compliance with federal law, Christensen said. Quote, school districts in the state should be very concerned, unquote. I would say so. This threat to California's federal education funding extends to other policies advanced by the Trump administration. The administration already has issued similar threats over policies related to transgender students and sex education curriculum. Yeah, so like Title IX complaints? Federal officials last week launched an investigation of the California Department of Education for allegedly withholding from parents information about changes to their child's gender identity, once again with billions of dollars potentially at stake. Right. Yeah, schools being encouraged to keep secrets on behalf of their children from the parents. especially dealing with sexual things. That's just so, to this day, it just makes me feel all yucky inside that that's even a thing that they would do or be encouraged to do or be protected from any kind of lawsuit or something for having done. Federal officials contend that the California law violates a federal law that guarantees parents access to their child's school records. The federal law, they say, takes precedence. State officials responded that the California law does not violate federal statutes because it does not affect the right of parents to request and receive records. Yeah, but if a kid is talking in school telling their teacher that they're not the gender that they are, the teacher's under no obligation to report this to the parents, and in fact could be penalized for doing so. Okay, a teacher is not a lawyer. A teacher is not a therapist. There's no right of confidentiality between a teacher, a student, and the parents unless they are reporting some kind of crime. Then maybe. But that's about it. The Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture lent her support to the enforcement action, threatening in a warning letter to Governor Gavin Newsom that she would withhold from California funds under her control. The Agriculture Department funds research and the venerable 4-H Youth Development Program, but its core school-related contribution is paying for food to feed children from low-income families while they are at school. The annual total of USDA school-related food aid for California is more than $3 billion a year. The Trump administration also is reviewing the curriculum of a sex education program in California for medical accuracy and age appropriateness, a move that has raised concerns from LGBTQ+ advocates who are worried about what they see as the potential censorship of comprehensive sexual health information, unquote. What an interesting thing to say. To make sure that sex education is medically accurate and age appropriate, and suddenly LGBTQ+ advocates are worried. Why? What an odd thing to say. But yeah, so there you go, guys. Lots and lots of moving and shoving and pushing and pulling all over the place when it comes to DEI and getting rid of it. Lots of pushback, and I'm not going to say that some of the initiatives being taken to get rid of DEI aren't themselves, and I hesitate to use the word given its implications of late, but it's true, aren't themselves problematic in their ambiguity. Because when you start passing laws or making statutes and stuff, and you aren't very explicit and specific about what you're looking for, you could actually create legitimate problems legally for people that aren't fair. Which is, again, as I said in the previous stream, a lot of this can be avoided if you just stick to the existing law and language of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Point to Title VI, point to Title VII. Send them the very simple text of each and just say, this is what you need to adhere to. Just tell us that you're not violating what these laws say. If you can tell us that and you can prove it, then there's not a whole heck of a lot we have to complain about. But if you have race or gender exclusionary programs or activities in your school, if you start teaching things that vilify people on the basis of their race or their gender and trying to use that as some sort of righting historical wrongs and that, yeah, you're violating the law. That should have been the case. That should have been something that was seen and enforced long ago. And I've been complaining about it. I try not to sound like some kind of nut, some kind of wingnut or something. And this is the thing that's always been the most frustrating part of it. It seems like simple math to me. I grew up and I was taught at a very early age that you don't treat people this way. I remember sitting in my first grade classroom with the TV on the stand with the VCR underneath it, for those of you who are old enough to remember this, wheeled in and we watched a video for Martin Luther King Jr. Day that was all old newsreel footage of the race riots and such down in the South back in the 50s and the 60s leading up to the Civil Rights Act and after. And of course, when you're a little kid, I was 6 years old and I saw this black and white footage. It looked like ancient history to me. I thought this was a long time ago, because I was a kid of the 80s with like color TV and spaceships and stuff. And when I watched this stuff, I saw people fighting and being mean to each other. And this is from a child's perspective, over someone looking different. And I thought to myself, that's bad. You don't do that to people. That's not nice. And I know I'm talking in simplistic terms, but that's the way it was. That's the way I was brought up. That's the way I was raised. And I had thought that when it came to governmental or overarching systemic type initiatives, all that stuff was in the past because of things like the Civil Rights Act, because of things like Martin Luther King Jr. Sure, there were going to be racists in the world. You can't defeat a bad idea except with better ideas, hopefully, at least not as part of policy. But, then 2015, 2016 roll around and suddenly DEI starts coming up and people start talking in no uncertain terms about their company goals and quotas and these people are bad and these people are good and we have to elevate the voices of these people because of what they look like versus what these other people look like. And for the last 8 some odd years, I've been thinking, am I taking crazy pills? Grown adults, older than me, or should at least know better elsewise, are promoting this stuff, and somehow they see it as a good. They see it as a overall benefit to society. This is helping people. This is making things better. And just the absolute cognitive dissonance between what they promote versus what they say they oppose. I get it as much now as I got it back then. I just don't. It just doesn't make any sense. It does not compute. And my bewilderment will continue pushing me to look into this stuff until I see the day where the light bulb finally goes off for the second time that we need to stop doing this. But maybe I'm tilting at windmills. What do you guys think? Failure B, they're worried they can't teach kindergartners what LGBTQ plus is when that's not for them to worry about until they're 16 or 17 when that becomes more precedent. Yeah. Sex education is about warning kids against, unwanted pregnancy, essentially. Because, whether you like it or not, kids are going to be curious about each other and things may happen between children or, minors. And just so you know, going into life, this is the risks you take. These are how things work. It's one big warning sign trying to prevent unwanted pregnancy going forward. Oh, but you want to do something that's age appropriate and medically accurate? Well, that threatens my ideology. That tells you everything you need to know about an ideology that would be opposed to that notion. Real quick. Let's see. What else we got here? Advocatus, it is like people have forgotten all the other times the Fed has threatened to withhold federal funds to force states into compliance with law. Yeah. Everybody's acting like this is some kind of new thing. And the fact that there's so much bewilderment, like, oh, you would take money away from starving children? No, you're taking money away from starving children by being discriminatory in your practices all these years. You've gotten away with it. This is the big problem. It was allowed to promulgate over all these years because there was no enforcement. There were no consequences. Puxatawny Phil looked out of his hole and didn't see his shadow this last decade. That's the problem. Trying to right the ship, so to speak, is going to be painful and awkward, and it's going to be all over the place because this stuff has been embedded into everything. And now these guys are going to throw up their hands and go like, oh, well. And I think a lot of the reaction to some of this stuff is intentionally overreacting. Oh, well, Donald Trump said we're going to be risking this. Well, I guess we have to turn off everything and hurt this thing. Even when we're overreacting, we're going to turn off this program and that program because we don't know what it means to be in compliance with DEI initiatives. It's like, oh, look what Trump did. We did this because of Trump. We don't know what he's talking about. We have no idea. So we'll just shut off everything. Throw a hissy fit. Well, I guess the next 10 days we'll see. I'll come back 10 days from yesterday. So by the next TED Excellence and next Friday's DEI Deathwatch, I guess we'll find out what the aftermath was. Because by then, the schools that were in compliance, great. What happens to the ones that weren't? We have a week to find out. But otherwise, everybody, that is the show for today. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Also, if you hadn't already seen it, we had a double feature, a surprise double feature on TED Excellence last night. It was not planned. That's, I guess, why I'd call it a surprise. But it was informative, sort of, I guess. I also have a Discord server. Would you like to join the Discord server? Link to the Discord server is in the chat. Just click on that link. You'll find yourself on the landing channel called Say Hello. And in addition to saying hello, you just have to say the secret word. The secret word will tell me that you are not a bot, have actually watched the stream, and have thus earned the right, the privilege, the entitlement to join the Discord server. And today's secret word is compliance. Just say hello, compliance, and I'll know that you watched the show. Elsewise, I'll be here Sunday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern for the Sunday stream, where I'll talk about news stories that have nothing to do with DEI, because I keep all those for this show. And you can find me there to find out what's going on in the world elsewise from DEI and everything else. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved. You have very, very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the Give, Send, Go pinned at the top of the chat box, thank you guys for your generosity. Very much appreciated. Everyone, have a good rest of your Friday. I hope you have a good weekend ahead of you. I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.